What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today doing something a little different. I'm going to do a tier ranking for each NFL team's free agency so far. Still a lot of big names out there and a lot can change, but I want to give my thoughts on who I think is having the best free agency so far, and I want to have a discussion with you about the same thing. So comment down below who you think is having a great offseason and who you think is completely fumbling the bag. And also, while you're down in the comment section, tell me who your favorite signings are, or maybe who your favorite team is and what signings you're excited about and which ones you aren't so happy with. Also, please, if you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, like football content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. But without further ado, we'll get started with the Buffalo Bills. And they haven't made any big splashy signings, but I think they've done a really good job keeping their core around. They re-signed Darrell Williams, John Feliciano, Matt Milano. Like all those moves, also like Levi Wallace. Glad that he's coming back. Jacob Hollister, they did need another tight end. Maybe he's that number 2 option with Dawson Knox. Keep Tywan Jones around. Emmanuel Sanders is a pretty interesting signing. Very similar to what they had with John Brown, but at a cheaper mark, so I can appreciate that. And then they also bring in Mitch Trubisky, which is perplexing. I mean, he's not a bad backup option. I guess he'd be better than Jake Fromm. And I guess in a year with Brian Dable, maybe he gets really good, and next offseason he proves he can become a starter. But felt kind of weird that they would spend $2.5 million on Trubisky, but who knows, maybe the project pays off and it pays dividends. So I like what the Bills have done to keep their core around, and that's the big reason they're going to go into the B tier. They're running back with the same team that we know is good, and then they made a few small additions, getting Emmanuel Sanders, but he's really just a John Brown replacement. So I think they got better, or at least stayed the same, which is already a really good team. On to the Miami Dolphins, and they had quite a busy offseason so far. So they bring in Jacoby Brissett. I think that's a really good backup option, especially if anything were to happen with Tua, who's had his injuries in the past. Brissett can step in and fill that void. Malcolm Brown, good power back. I think he fills in. I think that team's going to end up going with a running back committee, so Brown certainly fills a role within that. They made a trade for Isaiah Wilson, swapping sevenths with the Titans, though they did cut Wilson immediately, so not much really came out of that. I really love the signing of Will Fuller. I'm a big Will Fuller believer, and I think last year, 1, he stayed healthy, but 2, he became a better wide receiver. He's always had that speed. He's always had that big play element about him. Last year, things started to come together, and he became a better route runner. His hands were improved. He had less drops. Really like the direction Will Fuller is heading in. He's going to miss the first game of the year from that PED suspension, but nonetheless, I like the upside. And if he can stay on the field for every game after that suspension ends, this is a huge move for that Miami offense. Only a 1-year contract, but overall, the receiver market's down this offseason. It's just because the cap is down. So I like it for both sides. Fuller gets an opportunity to get a prove-it contract, but it's still a pretty sizable and healthy contract at that, and Miami addresses a big area of need. They also signed Matt Skura, who came under fire last year, had a hard time snapping to Lamar Jackson out of the pistol formation, but before that, was widely considered one of the better centers in the league, and the Dolphins got him for cheap, and that's not a position I think you needed to splurge on. Adam Butler, Benardrick McKinney, you get some decent starters, potential rotation options, and I really like Justin Coleman. 1 year, $2.75 million, and he's your nickel guy. We've seen flashes of him being a top-end nickel slot corner, and I think Coleman can get back to that for Brian Flores. So all in all, really happy with what the Dolphins offseasons look like. I'll put them into A tier. Next up, we'll talk about the New England Patriots, and they have been very busy. There's a lot to talk about here. They bring back Cam Newton. It's a very incentive-based deal. The base salary, $5.1 million. So say there's a world where the Pats go out and get Marcus Mariota or whatever, and the two of them are competing. Mariota gets the job. Newton doesn't play at all. It's just a $5 million contract, so it's a little bit more than you'd normally pay a backup QB, but it's not like the end of the world. It's not that $13.6 million mark that this deal could end up being. And if Newton hits all those incentives, it's a bargain at $13.6 million. So I think it works out a lot for the Patriots. I think that's a good move, and it's an opportunity for Newton now that he has a full offseason. Maybe he can dispel a lot of the criticism he got last year, and this team also added a lot of weapons, so maybe that helps him out. Speaking of those weapons, they signed Nelson Agholor and Kendrick Bourne. Agholor at $13 million a year feels like a lot considering he's had one good season, but that's one where I'll just defer to Bill Belichick and what he sees in Agholor as a deep threat. So I think it's a little hefty, but nonetheless, it's a position of need. So they were aggressive, and they went out and they filled that void, and they got a big play option in Agholor. And Kendrick Bourne, I think, does a lot of things well. He's a good X receiver, possession guy, good hands, getting better as a route runner, still pretty young. I like him getting better moving forward, and he's already a solid player. He's not groundbreaking, but he's solid. And then the big moves that everyone's been talking about, signing Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. The Pats are going back to that 2 tight end offense, lots of 12, and we'll probably even see 13 formations if you're unfamiliar with what that means. 12 is 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 13, 1 running back, 3 tight ends. And I love it. I absolutely love it. And when you look at this receiver market, it's down, but still Kenny Golladay, who we'll talk about later, got $18 million on a per year basis. You compare that to Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, you're paying him 12.5. So you get these great mismatch weapons, because, I mean, do you defend them with a linebacker? No, they're not going to be athletic enough. But they're also too big to be defended by a safety. So they cause all these mismatches, and they can do so much over the middle of the field, and they're cheaper than wide receivers. So it's really interesting how New England's playing this, and when they were the most dominant offense in the league, yeah, they had Randy Moss, they had Julian Edelman, they had Wes Welker for a portion of it, but what that offense ran through was Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski. We're hoping that Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, if you're a Pats fan, can be that good and avoid any off-the-field issues, but I love the signing. They both can block well, too, so fantasy note, Damian Harris might be a steal next year. Depending on where he's being ranked in his average draft position, this is already a really good offensive line he runs behind. I think if Cam Newton's under center, they're going to want to run the ball a lot. And then you have an extension of that offensive line in the form of Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. I'm telling you, Damian Harris might be in for a huge season. Very like Derrick Henry light. Not Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry light. They also made the trade to get Trent Brown back. He'll be starting at right tackle, maybe left tackle, but really liked that move, and that also allowed them to trade Marcus Cannon, and it allowed them to let Joe Thuney walk and still feel comfortable with that offensive line and put together a good group, but not have to overspend on a guard in Thuney. They also bring back David Andrews, 4-year, $19 million contract. He's had his health concerns, but he's been a team captain. He's familiar in that locker room, and it's a pretty cheap contract for a center. Again, that's a position I don't think you need to overspend on. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, Devon Godshaw, good run stopper when he's healthy, like that, 2-year contract. Henry Anderson's a very underrated player. I think that he did a good job for the Jets last year, and that feels like a Bill Belichick type of guy. Matt Judon, 4-year, $56 million contract. He fits really well with what New England wants to do, and I think he's going to continue to have success. And he can be versatile and do a lot of different things, just like Kyle Van Noy, who the Pats bring back, and they get him at a super cheap point. 2 years, $13.2 million. We know Van Noy fits that system. He balled out, got the big contract from Miami, who then cut him after a year. So he just heads back to New England. We know that's a fit. Raekwon McMillan, good young player. I could see Bill Belichick finding success with him and getting him to hit his potential as well. Jalen Mills was one that I was kind of meh about. I don't know if he's going to play corner or safety, but nonetheless, that really breaks down to really a 2-year deal, even though it's a 4-year, $24 million contract. After 2 years, the Pats can move on pretty much with no penalty against them, so I think of it more as a 2-year contract. Belichick favors versatility. Mills definitely gives you that. All that to say, this is no doubt an S-tier offseason that New England has put together. They've been fantastic, and there's going to be 3 teams in the S-tier. New England is one of them. I think they've done a great job. Moving on to the New York Jets, made a couple of moves at wide receiver. Keelan Cole, 1-year, $5.5 million deal. I think that's a solid contract, and he's more of a slot guy, so I'll be interested to see if they try to trade Jamison Crowder, get some value for him. But the big name wideout they added was Corey Davis, 3 years, just under $38 million on the contract. Davis finally broke out last year. I thought he'd go back to Tennessee and stay in the offense that got him to hit that level and feel like a top 5 worthy pick, but instead he's off to New York, and it's a relatively inexpensive contract. I mean, compared to someone like Kenny Golladay, I think the Jets got a good value, and Davis has that big play potential. He's certainly a deep threat, and he's young, and from the Jets' perspective, you get him for $12.5 million, and he might only be getting better. So by the end of that contract, we look at it and we're saying, wow, New York got a steal there. They also, I think, got a good deal on Carl Lawson. 3 years, $45 million. I like Lawson. I know the sacks aren't necessarily there, but he's young. I think 25, maybe 26. Getting better. He is going to have to adjust to a new defense under Robert Saleh compared to what he was playing in Cincy, but when you look at that Cincinnati defense, they trade Carlos Dunlap, who had 1 sack with the Bengals, goes on to Seattle and becomes a game wrecker of sorts. Not fully, but he becomes a really solid player, and quadruples his sack output, plus the QB hurries and pressures were there as well. So some of it is about the scheme and Cincy. Something is there that limits the upside for pass rushers for whatever reason. Carl Lawson's also really good in the run game. I like that signing for the Jets. $15 million doesn't feel like too much, maybe a little bit more than what some were expecting, but I mean, you're talking about a potential elite edge rusher if he hits his potential and hits his peak. So $15 million is not too bad there. They also made a move to get Jarrad Davis, super speedy and athletic linebacker, but he struggles in coverage, and this team has CJ Mosley, so I'm kind of meh about that move. I don't foresee Jarrad Davis becoming Fred Warner for Robert Saleh, but 1 year, $7 million contract, since it's a 1 year deal and you had money to spend, there's kind of no going wrong here, because if he doesn't play well, you just don't bring him back next year. They also franchise tagged Marcus May, but he was upset about that, and they are apparently nowhere near an agreement on a long-term deal. So we'll see how that breaks out. That could change how I look at this offseason for the Jets. And they also signed LaMarcus Joyner, 1 year, $4.5 million. Feels like a solid value for where Joyner's at in his career. So with all that said, I think I'm going to put the Jets in A tier. They definitely got better. I think they made some wise contract decisions. They got good values for the players they signed. All in all, I think the Jets did a good job. So on to the AFC North, starting with the Baltimore Ravens. I think I'm going to put them in B tier. Really considered A, but I think B is where I'm going to settle. I love the Kevin Zeitler signing. Like, when we know he's playing good football, he is one of the better guards in the league. 3 years, $22 million, so you also get him at a good value. It was a position of need. Honestly, you really could not have done much better this offseason for the Ravens. Also like the trade to get Josh Oliver. They needed another number 2 tight end, and I think Oliver could be one of those players that breaks out and can fill that role. Also, by the way, I might do a video in the coming weeks about like top 10 breakout potential players, and if you wanted to see that, let me know in the comments below. I've been thinking about some players who I think are going to be due for a big season next year. But back to the Ravens, also like bringing back Tyus Bowser, 4-year, $22 million deal. I know Tyus Bowser is not the elite edge rushing name. Like, they didn't bring back Yannick Ngakoue. He doesn't have that name recognition, but I think Bowser's a good player. You get him at a solid value. I think he can be an every down edge option for Baltimore. They also get back Pernell McPhee. That's more of a whatever signing to me. Like, he's familiar with the system. He's a good enough player. They bring back Justin Ellis, and they sign Derek Wolfe. Wolfe's a fine football player as well. See, the reason I put him in B tier is because if you take away the Zeitler signing, I'd be contemplating C to B. But the Zeitler signing, I think, solidifies B, and I like it so much I kind of want to put him in A, but I think I'm going to keep them in B tier. On to the Cincinnati Bengals. They're a tough one to judge, too. So they signed Riley Reiff, and I love that signing. I think he might play right tackle, especially if they end up going offensive line at pick number 5, like Penei Sewell. Maybe you play Sewell at left, move Jonah Williams inside to guard, and you play Reiff at right. I don't know. But I think Riley Reiff has potential to be a really good right tackle, and he played a lot better last year than people were expecting at left tackle in Minnesota. So I think Reiff's still getting better. And 1 year, $7.5 million deal for a left tackle, or just a tackle in general, that's pretty solid value. They also signed Trey Hendrickson. That's your Carl Lawson replacement. 4 years, $60 million. Hendrickson is older than Lawson. And also, I just have a couple of red flags when it comes to Hendrickson. I think he can be good. Obviously, you look at the sack production last year and you say this guy deserved $15 million a year. But even last year, he was used as a rotation edge rusher with Davenport and Jordan. He made the most of it, certainly, got the numbers to prove it. You could say, hey, he was a rotation player, got 13 plus sacks. Now as an every down edge rusher, he should explode and be one of the league leaders in that category. And I don't know if that thinking totally adds up. Also, the Saints could have franchise tagged him, but instead they went with Marcus Williams. And typically, safety, do you want to pay $10 million for safety? That's kind of a tough question to ask yourself compared to what you could pay a defensive end. So the fact that the Saints didn't want to re-sign him, they didn't franchise tag him, they continued to use him as a rotational piece, I don't know. Something about that feels fishy. So this one it'll take time to see if this pays off for Cincinnati. But if it does, obviously, it's great. It fills a need. They get their Carl Lawson replacement. But I could see in a year or two's time where we look at this and we're saying, man, I can't believe Trey Hendrickson is getting paid $15 million a year. But I want to be optimistic, and I want to say that the Bengals got a good Carl Lawson replacement. They also bring in Larry Ogunjobi, like that signing. I think he's a really good fit next to DJ Reader. Ogunjobi more of a pass rushing D tackle, Reader more of your nose tackle, that run stuffer. Chidobe Awuzie is interesting. I think he fits better as a slot corner, who we're going to talk about who's going to be playing the slot here in a second. But if you have Awuzie as cornerback 2, Trey Waynes, if he can come back from injury and be what he was a couple years ago in Minnesota, I think you have a couple of solid outside corners. And then, of course, they got a steal in Mike Hilton. $6 million a year to take him away from a division rival at that. So you go from playing him twice a year to then getting him on your squad at a great value. So I love the Hilton signing. Awuzie's, okay. Hendrickson's kind of a wild card. I'll go B. I really do like that Hilton signing, so I think that buoys it up. Otherwise, maybe I'm looking at C tier, but all in all, for a team that had money to spend, I think they addressed some big areas of need. I also like the Riley Reif signing. So this team definitely got better, and that's kind of what this B tier is to me. Like, did you get better? Or did you at least keep your group together if you're a really good team? And that's what the Bengals did. You also have to factor in, like, cap restraints, right? Like, the Bills don't have as much money to spend as the Jets did. So they did a good job. But if we're basing it just off of who signed what, who spent the most money, a team like Buffalo or Baltimore would be a lot lower. But, you had to keep that cap number in mind. On to the Cleveland Browns. This one's really another one that's tough to grade. Bring back Rashad Higgins, got a lot of playing time last year. They bring in Takk McKinley 1 year up to $4 million after they got rid of Adrian Claiborne, who I think was good for them, and a lower cap number. Only a difference of $1 million or so, but in a year where the cap's down, every dollar counts. So McKinley brings you more upside. He's younger, sure, but I don't know. He's been a pretty big disappointment thus far in his career. Malik Jackson, I think he's been overrated for a while now. He had that really good season in Denver where they won the Super Bowl, and then he's been coasting off of that ever since. Malcolm Smith re-signs, okay. But then these next three are ones that I really like for Cleveland. Anthony Walker, he was better 2 years ago than he was last year, but he's still young, and I think he fits that defense really well, and he fills a need. And if he gets back to where he was 2 seasons ago, I think they got him at a really good value. Troy Hill, you get your potential slot, but also has experience playing on the outside at 4 years, $24 million. That's a steal of a contract. I think they'll play him in the slot and keep Greedy Williams on the outside with Denzel Ward, but Hill has experience doing both. He was a lot better this past season. That was the best season he's had, and that was in the nickel role in LA. So I think that's where they're going to try to play him. And of course, they get a great deal with John Johnson the third, 3 years, $33.75 million, $24 million guaranteed. John Johnson's a great player. They needed a safety, and now you're looking at a team that has Delpit, who coming back from injury, I think is due for a big year. You have Ronnie Harrison, who could fit in the box as like an in-box sub-linebacker safety type of role, and John Johnson. So you could run big nickel, big dime schemes where you have all three on the field. Ultimately, I trust that team. They have a good coaching staff. They're going to get their best players on the field. So they get John Johnson at a good rate. Really love that signing. So all in all, despite me not being crazy about some of the signings Cleveland had, I think those last three, Walker, Hill, and Johnson, address big areas of need on the defense. And this team already has a good offense. They needed to attack defense, and they still have their first-round pick to go and bolster that side of the football even more. So I like what the Browns have done so far. Now we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. And when I originally did this a couple days ago, it was prior to the Juju Smith-Schuster signing. I had him in C tier. They bring back Juju. I'll move him up to B tier. I'm a Steelers fan. They get back Ray McCloud, which, he's a special teamer. Juju is good value, right? 1 year, $8 million. That is a good value. It's so while it's a good value, it's also only a $1.6 million cap hit this year due to void years, and most of it's in signing bonus. So honestly, it's a great fit for Pittsburgh and where they're at when it comes to the cap situation. So, I have to like it. Juju is an upgrade, I guess, over someone like James Washington, though I will say the wide receiver core of Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and James Washington, I think would be just fine. And then Eric Ebron in at tight end. I'm a big believer in Chase Claypool, big fan of his. Deontay Johnson, once he was able to cut down the drops, was playing really good football and really emerged as wide receiver 1 for Pittsburgh. And then James Washington, when he gets on the field, he always makes a play to make you notice him. You always know where James Washington is with one catch or two. He always comes through in big spots, typically on third down. So I'm happy they bring Juju back. He's gotten good production in regards to the QB play he's been playing with. Ben has been inconsistent 2 years ago, talking about playing with Mason Rudolph and Delvin Hodges. But this is going to be a big year for Juju. This is a prove-it contract if I've ever seen one. And if it works out well, then next year Ben won't be under contract, and the cap's going back up, and then the Steelers could re-sign him to a big contract. So I think it makes sense for both sides. They also re-signed Zach Banner, and I think that's a name to keep your eye on. There's a lot of hype going into him before this past season. Then he tears his ACL week 1 against the Giants. If he's able to come back and he's healthy, 2 years, $9.5 million, we could be re-looking at that contract as a steal for Pittsburgh. Don't know which tackle spot he'll be playing. He was figuring to play on the right side, but now no word on Alejandro Villanueva, so he might be having to slide over to left tackle unless Pittsburgh drafts a player at that position. They also bring back B.J. Finney, who had been with the Steelers for a long time, been in Cincinnati this past year. They also get back Cameron Sutton, who is going to be the Mike Hilton replacement, I assume, in the slot, and they get at a great value, 2 years, $9 million. So Pittsburgh couldn't do a whole lot, but they got a lot of really good value signings. I'll keep them at B tier, though with re-signing Juju, they are going to have to move on from Steven Nelson, which creates a hole on the outside at that cornerback spot. I love Justin Lane. He hasn't seen the field a whole lot, but coming out of Michigan State, I was a big fan of his. Big, tall, lanky corner, something that Pittsburgh just didn't have, and maybe this is the year he gets to break out onto the scene. On to the AFC South, starting with the Houston Texans. When I did this a couple days ago, they were in D tier, largely because of how they handled the Deshaun Watson situation, which now is evolving even more with the sexual harassment and assault allegations against him. Serious stuff, won't talk about it, don't know enough information, but nonetheless there's a lot coming out, and it seems to be an evolving situation. Day by day we find out a little bit more, so once we see the NFL investigation and the legal investigation into it, we'll have a better idea and have some clarity on that. But nonetheless, Houston's still holding firm. They don't want to trade Watson. Maybe now they're listening to offers, I don't know. But outside of that, they signed Tyrod Taylor, then trade for Ryan Finley, 2 moves that signal to me they are willing to part ways with Watson. Then they crowd up the running back room with a signing of Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay. Get them on like affordable contracts, but now you have 3 starting running backs essentially with David Johnson, Ingram, and Lindsay. I don't know, it feels like a cluttered room. They signed Andre Roberts to a deal up to almost $6 million. He's a special teamer, really more than anything else. Dante Moncrief, he's been a league, journeyman. Marcus Cannon, they get in a deal from New England for relatively cheap. That's a pretty good deal they made there. Justin Britt, they signed to a 1-year deal. Not bad. They get Shaq Lawson to trade with the Dolphins. Okay move. Then there's deals where they bring in someone like Christian Kirksey for $4.5 million. And I'm like, but what was the point of that? Like, I don't know. Like, Kirksey is what he is. He has been the same player for the past few seasons. But then they make moves like Desmond King, 1-year deal, $3.5 million. And I'm like, that's too good of a value to ignore. Plus, like I mentioned, they got Marcus Cannon at a pretty discounted price. Didn't have to give up much to get him. So they had a couple of moves that bring about good value. So I'll put them in C tier. But all in all, it's not been a great offseason for the Texans. And now we're on to the Indianapolis Colts. And this is one of the toughest ones to talk about because they have so much cap room. We thought they could spend and potentially be an S-tier team, but they've held off. They made the move to get Carson Wentz, so you find the potential QB of the future like that. They get Marlon Mack on a 1-year, $2 million deal. I thought he was going elsewhere and was going to be a starter. Maybe Green Bay if they didn't keep Aaron Jones. Maybe Buffalo if they wanted to address that position. Maybe Seattle if they wanted someone cheaper than Chris Carson. But nonetheless, he's going back to Indy at a super cheap deal. And then Xavier Rhodes is re-signing like that. But they still have so much money. It felt like they would be in on Kenny Golladay or Juju Smith-Schuster or someone at that wide receiver spot, or maybe go out and get Trent Williams to be that left tackle, Riley Reiff for that matter, someone to fill that void, because they have a first-round pick, but they also need help at edge, which they have not addressed. They need a left tackle after Anthony Costanzo retired. They have not addressed it. They need another wide receiver, and they just have not addressed it. So I like the Wentz, Mack, Rhodes acquisition/re-signings, but they just have not done enough to be anything more than B. I think getting Wentz is what keeps them here in B. Otherwise, I think they'd be C. But Wentz puts them in B, but this team definitely should have been A or S. And for that matter, the team that they should have been in A tier with is Jacksonville. What Jacksonville has done is what we thought Indy would do. They had cap space, and they were aggressive, and they went and spent it, but they also got good value on some deals. They paying $7 million to Jamal Agnew is a little perplexing. They also bring in Philip Dorsett. They're starting to crowd that wide receiver room, but I love the Marvin Jones signing. 2 years, $7 million. He's a super underrated player. Finally got to be a wide receiver one last year in Detroit and put up some big numbers once Galladay went down. Love that signing. You have him and DJ Chark on the outside, Laviska Shenault on the inside. They didn't bring back Keelan Cole. You also have D.D. Westbrook in that room. So we'll see about Agnew and Dorsett, how they fit in. But nonetheless, if you're talking about Chark and Jones on the outside, and then players like Westbrook and Laviska Shenault being your slot option, Shenault also just gives you a ton of versatility. You can do a lot of different things with them. That's a really talented core. And this is all before, of course, they're going to take Trevor Lawrence at number 1 overall. They franchise tag Cam Robinson, maybe still a young player, 25 years old. Maybe he has room to get better. They bring back Tyson Alualu, who was once a top 10 pick for the Jags, and now he fits this defense a lot better. When he was drafted, they were in a 4-3 defense. Now they're in a base 3-4, and in a nose tackle position, he was really good for Pittsburgh in that spot. I think he'll have a lot of success for Jacksonville. Love that signing. Roy Robertson Harris has been one people talked about, almost $8 million a year on a per-year basis. But I think he is one of those guys who could break out this upcoming year. He would probably be in that video if I make it in these coming weeks. I like that signing. That could be one in a few years we look back and say the Jags got a steal there. They also re-signed Sidney Jones, team option. That's a good move. And the big move they made at cornerback, signing Shaquille Griffin. Love that signing. 3 years, $44.5 million. Griffin's primarily been playing in zone coverage up in Seattle, cover 3 defense, largely for Pete Carroll. But I think he has the athleticism and just man coverage ability to fit into what Jacksonville wants to do. And that's if they want to run a lot of man. They drafted C.J. Henderson last year, who was really good, maybe the best man coverage corner out of the draft. I think you can comfortably say that, especially after Okudah had his troubles last year. It's tough as a corner to come into year 1, but nonetheless, C.J. Henderson was really impressive. But Urban Meyer might not want to be so man-heavy. He might not want to be zone-heavy. He might just have a mix. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But I think no matter what they want to do, Shaquille Griffin gives them a really good option there in that cornerback group. You keep Sidney Jones around. You already have C.J. Henderson. That's becoming a really nice cornerback trio in Jacksonville. They did overspend a little bit on Rayshon Jenkins. I feel like they wanted John Johnson III. He decides to go to Cleveland. Maybe they thought they were too low on the offer, so then they go splurge on Rayshon Jenkins, 4 years, $35 million, $16 million guaranteed. I'm not crazy about that, but outside of the whiff on Jenkins, I like a lot of what this team has done. I'll put them into A tier. They had the money, they were aggressive, they spent it, and they got better. And that team could go from picking number 1 to maybe 6, 7 wins next year, especially with Trevor Lawrence under helm. That'll go a long way. Then we get to the Tennessee Titans, and I really contemplated putting him in A tier because I love some of these signings. Danico Autry, I think, is a perfect fit with Justin Simmons along that 3-man, 3-4 front line. They get Jayon Brown back, super cheap, 1 year, $5.25 million. They spent big on Bud Dupree. I am a big fan of Dupree. I think he was our best run defender last year in Pittsburgh until he got hurt. He's also getting better as a pass rusher. Him and Harold Landry, a very formidable duo on the outside of Tennessee, will just let them rush the passer, stop dropping into coverage, let them be edge rushers. They bring in Janoris Jenkins. Cornerback is a need. They also signed Kevin Johnson. And by getting Dupree, bringing back Jayon Brown, this feels like a team that went from almost assuredly going edge in the first round to maybe they're going corner there in the early 20s. So I really like a lot of those signings, but at the same time, what are they doing at tight end? No Jonnu Smith. What are they going to do opposite of A.J. Brown at wide receiver? No Corey Davis, and they also let go of Adam Humphries, which is not that big of a deal, but now I have questions about where that offense is going moving forward. Also, you lose your offensive coordinator, obviously, in Arthur Smith. He's now the head coach in Atlanta, so I like the signings, but then I worry about the departures, so I'll put them in B tier. Next up is the Denver Broncos, and this is going to be kind of surprising for some people, and I understand why you might not agree, but I'm going to put them in A tier. They still have a lot of needs to address, no doubt about it. But I like the signing of Mike Boone. I feel like that's good value. He's somebody who could break out. Shelby Harris had a good year for you last year. You keep him in the building, get him at a solid value, what he's worth. They franchise tag Justin Simmons, work out an extension, so it's going to be, $15.5 million a year on an average per year basis. You know, that's a lot for a safety. But after this season, when the cap goes back up, the TV money kicks in, we're going to be looking at that contract as tremendous value for the best free safety in football. And then I think they overspent on Ronald Darby. If they didn't get Ronald Darby, I'd honestly be arguing this team might have an S tier offseason for what they could do and where the cap was at. But I think they overspent on Darby. 3-year, $30 million, $19.5 million guaranteed. It's going to be a tough one to move on from if they try to in the coming years. But then after Kyle Fuller's released, they sign him for a 1-year, $9.5 million deal. I mean, the fact Fuller is cheaper than Darby is just mind-boggling. But you know Fuller fits in that Vic Fangio defense. They had a lot of success in Chicago. Love that signing. And now you're looking at a cornerback crew that includes Michael Ojemudia, Ronald Darby, Kyle Fuller, and Bryce Callahan. There's a lot to like, and now that team doesn't have to go cornerback at 9. They can go Micah Parsons if they want to go linebacker. Maybe Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, have him be a strong safety of sorts. They moved on from Kareem Jackson. I don't know. Now the options are available, or maybe from 9 they're trying to move up and get the QB of the future. I don't know, but the options are open, and I like what Denver has done, so I'm going to put them in A tier. On to Kansas City. They're going to be another A tier team. And really just because of where the cap was at, they couldn't do much. But then they bring in Joe Thuney and Kyle Long. Love those signings a lot. I do have a little bit of worry. I think Long might end up playing tackle, at right tackle in specific. And that's because they have Thuney. LeRae Duvernay-Tardif is going to be coming back after opting out last season. Or we assume he's coming back. And he's a guard. Maybe he could kick inside to center. They do need to address that position. And they signed Mike Remmers, who in the Super Bowl was terrible at tackle, but he's not that bad at guard. So if it's Thuney, Duvernay-Tardif, Remmers, then Long, maybe? Or do you keep Remmers at right tackle, keep Long on the inside? I don't know. So that tackle spot is still a weird one, but Joe Thuney's a stud. Kyle Long looks to be in the best shape he's been in throughout his entire NFL career. He looks fantastic, and I think he can bounce back and be worth the $5 million they're giving him. Then you get Duvernay-Tardif back. So they're addressing offensive line, which obviously is a big need. And they get Taco Charlton back, at this point just a rotational edge guy who has some upside, young player. So you keep him in the building. So for what Kansas City had in regards to cap room, I think they did a good job. They also offered a contract to Juju Smith-Schuster, 1-year, $11 million deal. So they do need to address wide receiver, no doubt about it. Maybe there's a reunion in place between them and Sammy Watkins or them and Demarcus Robinson. We'll have to wait and see. But if they got Juju, then I'd be arguing maybe S tier for Kansas City, but we'll keep them in A. On to the Vegas Raiders, and this is another A-tier team. Honestly, I'm really enjoying what the AFC West has done in free agency thus far. Kenyon Drake, $5.5 million a year on a 2-year contract. Might be a little much for running back 2, but I really like Drake as a player, and him and Josh Jacobs, I think, fit really well together. They also signed Theo Riddick. That's a really small contract, basically the veteran minimum. That's whatever. They get John Brown, 1 year, $3.75 million. It feels like just a cheaper Nelson Aguilar, and with this team tight on money, I love that move. They also need to move on from Marcus Mariota. This is about the time they need to make the trade or make the cut, get that almost $11 million in cap room back, because there are things they still need to address. They keep Zay Jones around as well. I think he's a fine football player. They get Richie Incognito back after releasing him, and now he's playing for cheaper. That's great. They re-signed Denzel Good, I should say. A lot of Raiders fans excited about him. He got a lot of playing time last year. There's, and a reason to be excited. There's certainly some upside there. Great contract for Yannick Ngakoue. 2 years, $26 million deal. They need to address edge, and dude, the Raiders did just that. They signed Ngakoue. They attack defensive tackle with Jonathan Hankins and signing Quentin Jefferson. They like Hankins. They bring him back. Jefferson, I think, is a good young football player, and I think he can be another good option there at D tackle. They bring in Solomon Thomas. Got some upside here. 1 year, $5 million deal. Could be a good prove-it contract, and maybe a potential for Thomas to break out and finally be that, top 4 pick or top 3 pick, that he was in the NFL draft. And then they also bring back Nicholas Morrow. So this team said, we need to fix the defense. Let's do it. They were aggressive, and they attacked a lot of the areas they needed to get better at. Still could use some help at corner. Need to address tackle along the offensive line. I'm glad they got Incognito back. Re-signing Good is also a good move. No pun intended. But they need to address, that tackle position, especially at right tackle. Could use a center as well. And maybe a big body receiver would go well for this team as well. But all in all, I liked what they've done. They said we have a weak defensive line, and they went out and they addressed it. And I can really appreciate that aggressiveness. On to the LA Chargers. This one is hard because they've had one signing that I really like. They bring in Corey Linsley, and it's a 5-year deal, $62.5 million, but there's an opt-out after 2 years. So if Lindsey proves to not be worth the money, you can get out pretty quickly, and by then he's age 32. Maybe, he's starting to, decline in his play. So there is an opt-out for LA, but they address the offensive line there in a big way. Lindsey was an all-pro center last year. They're trying to protect Joe Burrow, like that signing. Matt Filer does not deserve $7 million a year. That one kind of perplexing to me. Jared Cook, familiar with Joe Lombardi, who's going to be the OC in LA. They worked with each other in New Orleans. So Cook's an okay replace. He's like a league average tight end. You lose Hunter Henry, so at least you got a league average player to replace him. And then there hasn't been a whole lot else. So if not for Corey Linsley, this is probably a C or D offseason for the Chargers. But they get Linsley, and they address the offensive line, which I can appreciate. And I'll keep them in B tier for right now. On to the Dallas Cowboys, and really there's only one move I like here, but it's at the most important position. They finally signed and paid Dak Prescott. It's been talked about so much, you don't want to hear me talk about it anymore, but they finally did it, and that's the most important position on the field. So they at least get a B tier offseason, but outside of that, not a whole lot. They bring back Jordan Lewis, 3-year deal. Kind of felt like a little bit too much money, but maybe he's still getting better. Pretty young option. And then everybody else they signed are just depth defensive linemen and offensive linemen. So they're trying to get deeper, which I can appreciate. Just no splash signings. And Dak's cap hit this year is only $22.5 million, despite it being an average $40 million per year contract. So it felt like with a smaller cap hit for Dak Prescott this season, this team was going to be more active, but they just really haven't. So they addressed the most important position, so I give them credit. They get a B. On to the Giants, and we'll start with the big name ones. They signed Kenny Golladay. They finally splurged on a wide receiver, and they need it. Darius Slayton is a good downfield threat. He has that big playability. Sterling Shepard is an okay player. I think he's pretty good in the slot. And they cut Golden Tate, but they needed number one, and they went out and they got it. Golladay was interested. The Giants were interested. Dave Gettleman finally splurged on a wide receiver. 4-year, $72 million deal. Love that contract. Galladay's gotten better and better every year, and with the more football he's played. He was a developmental third-round pick, end of the third round, I should say. And, up until the injury last year, he was just getting better and better and improving as a football player. And that's really the only injury that he's had. Granted, injuries can be weird. They can linger. They can, mount up very quickly. But I trust that Galladay's going to be able to bounce back in. It gives Daniel Jones just a bailout wide receiver. He's big. He's got great hands. Throw the ball in his direction. Galladay's going to find a way to come away with it. They also get John Ross on a super cheap deal. Not too bad. Kyle Rudolph, 2-year, $14 million. Felt like a slight overspend, $7 million a year. But veteran presence, he's great in the red zone, and maybe he can help Evan Ingram cut down on those drops and get better as a route runner as well. And then another big move, they re-signed Leonard Williams, which they definitely needed to do. About a $21 million a year average, but a lot of that is backloaded, and because of that, him taking a smaller cap hit this year allowed them to go out and get Kenny Golladay. So I'm going to put the Giants in A tier. They keep Leonard Williams around. They address wide receiver with Kenny Golladay. There's a couple moves that are weird, like Mike Glennon and Kyle Rudolph is a little strange, but still there's rationale behind that. So it also allows them at pick number 11 to not have to go wide receiver. They still might, and they should consider it, but they can go offensive line and replace Kevin Zeitler that way, maybe with a player like Rashawn Slater. So all in all, really like what the Giants have done. On to the Philadelphia Eagles. They were destined for D tier until they got Anthony Harris on a 1-year, $5 million deal. That's such good value that I have to bump him up to C tier. I have to give credit where credit is due. That's a fantastic value signing. It's a prove-it deal for Harris. He has an opportunity to go back out on the market next offseason with the cap up higher and try to get the money he almost had at the end of the 2019 season before he was franchise tagged by the Vikings. But that's really the only signing of mention for the Eagles. They're still holding on to Zach Ertz. They need to trade him, maybe to Tennessee. Maybe that addresses that tight end position now that they don't have Jonnu Smith, or Jacksonville would probably be my prediction. But it's tough right now. They didn't have a whole lot of money to spend, and because of that, they're in C tier. And on to the Washington football team. Here is the second of our 3 S tier teams. I think they've done a fantastic job. You bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick, 1-year, $10 million deal. He's proven he's still a good enough league starter. You get him at a cheap value. And last year he was top 5 in the league in QBR. I don't know if that's going to be sustainable, but he won't lose you games. He's going to be good enough for a team that's going to want to run the football, has playmakers around him, and a fantastic defense. Speaking of playmakers, they signed Curtis Samuel. So now you have him and Terry McLaurin. Charles Sims, a big body option too. He got better. Logan Thomas is emerging as one of the better tight ends in football. Really like the pieces they're putting around Fitzpatrick. Also, they get back Brandon Sheriff on the franchise tag. There's interest between the two sides of working out a long-term deal. And if they do, it probably lowers that cap hit from 18 to a more reasonable mark for an offensive lineman. Ted Larson, they get a center there. That's always good. And then they get William Jackson III. Love that signing. They have a great pass rush, so maybe you think they don't need to spend big on corner, but why not have both? To pull Tony Stark, why not have both? An elite pass rush, but also a playmaking shutdown corner on the outside who's only 28 years old. I love the 3-year deal they gave to Jackson. They also re-signed Dustin Hopkins. And all in all, where this team is at, they are positioned well to where if a QB starts to fall in the draft, they can go trade up and get a guy to be the future at that position, and Fitzpatrick can be that bridge player for them. But they also can just wait back and maybe go offensive tackle at 19 and, kick the QB position to next offseason and try to address it then. So this team has put themselves in a position where they have options, but they're also ready to go and maybe the best team inside that division. Moving to the NFC North, we'll start with the Chicago Bears, and I really kind of want to just put them in D, but they did tag Allen Robinson. It could be a tag and trade situation, so this could change. If they get a good haul for Robinson, maybe they stay in C, but if they, don't get enough value, they move down to D. I also want to put them in D just because they're keeping Allen Robinson trapped in Chicago. And don't worry, it's not Mitch Trubisky under center. It's going to be Andy Dalton, so it's a side grade. It doesn't really go up, but it doesn't go down, I guess. Dalton's playing for $10 million, so I guess it's an okay value compared to what maybe Trubisky was asking for at one point. Trubisky ends up signing for $2.5 million, though, so think about that. But outside of Allen Robinson, they signed Mario Edwards. They signed Desmond Trufant, who's just not that good anymore. They re-signed Cairo Santos, Pat O'Donnell, so they keep their special teams core. I don't know. There's just not a lot to like there. And, I feel bad for Bears fans. They got their hopes up, thought they were going to get Russell Wilson, and that was just not ever going to be a possibility this offseason. Maybe next offseason when it's a smaller cap hit against the Seahawks. But, yeah, definitely a disappointing offseason for Chicago Bear fans. On to the Lions, and I think I'm going to put Detroit in B tier, like a lot of what they've done. So, of course, you have the trade. You get rid of Matt Stafford. You get Jared Goff. Maybe he's the future of that position. I would lean that it's probably not, but Brad Holmes, their GM, gets a first-round pick in 2022 and 2023, and this team is not going to be competitive for the next 3 seasons. Like, they're not going to be in a position to win that division until at least 2023-2024 season. So for Brad Holmes, it's an opportunity to get extra first-round picks and make this team yours, put your fingerprint on the roster, so I like that for him, and I like that hire in general for Detroit. Jamal Williams signs a 2-year, $7.5 million deal. You take him from a division rival, and he's a really good football player. I think he's a nice compliment to DeAndre Swift. I'm wondering what they're going to do with Kerryon Johnson. I still think he can be an okay player at the NFL level, but Williams and Swift like that tandem. They signed Brashad Perriman. That one's kind of whatever to me. He's had flashes and moments. He tends to be a player who has big games late in the year and then warrants a contract in the offseason. So I'm kind of hesitant on Perriman, but he's only playing for $3 million, so it's not too bad. They also signed Tyrell Williams, 1-year, $4.7 million deal. Like that signing, there's some upside there. When he first joined the Raiders, he was a touchdown machine, and then it kind of fell off. He had some injuries and ultimately just wasn't a big part of the offense. So bit of a prove-it deal. The Lions get a chance to get a guy who maybe gets back to hitting where he was when he first signed with the Raiders. And if it doesn't work out, it's a 1-year deal, whatever. You move on, and it's a chance for Williams to prove that he is a valuable wide receiver and can make some more money next offseason. They also re-signed Romeo Okwara. That's the big move that I'm really happy they did. Okwara coming off a 10-sack season. Really like the progression he's made at that DN spot. Also has his brother in Detroit, so that's kind of a fun storyline. But that defense is already bad. You don't want to see it get any worse. Keep a good young edge rusher around. They do that. Roquan are going to be playing for about $13 million a year, so it's also pretty solid value. They also make a trade with the Rams to get Michael Brockers, give up a 7th for a really good D tackle, so that's obviously a good trade. The Rams have to clear cap, so it made sense for the Lions to go absorb that salary. So I'll give them a B so far this offseason. And next up, the Green Bay Packers. And I'll put them in B. They were just so strung up with cap room that they really can't do much. They have to let Corey Linsley walk. I don't know if they're going to bring back Zane Taylor. They did re-sign Aaron Jones, and that's a big part of that offense. He's such a talented player. He's great running the football. He's awesome catching it out of the backfield. So there's a lot of different things he does for you. So keeping him around when you didn't have that much cap to play around with is big. They still need to address, I think, linebacker. They could definitely use a cornerback too. Need to replace Kevin King big time. And offensive line, especially on the interior center guard spot, there's some question marks there. But all things considered, I feel pretty confident giving the Green Bay Packers a B. And on to the Minnesota Vikings. I think I'm also going to put them in B tier. The signings that I really like, Pat Pete, 1 year, $10 million deal. Mike Zimmer gets another cornerback in that group, by far the oldest, most veteran player there. And Pat Pete's still a solid player, so it makes a ton of sense. Him and Cameron Dantzler could prove to be a really good duo on the outside for Minnesota. And also, I like the signing of Dalvin Tomlinson. You have Michael Pierce coming back, but this team was abysmal against the run last year. They were putrid, terrible, whatever word you want to use. So why not have Dalvin Tomlinson and Michael Pierce on the field together on 1st and 2nd down and just completely take away opponents' rushing attacks? Once you get to 3rd down, you'll probably take Michael Pierce off the field. Tomlinson, I think, has some pass rush upside, so you leave him out there. And you get Danielle Hunter back. Maybe they go edge at 14, but with the loss of Riley Reif, I think it's going to end up being offensive line, or maybe trade down and go offensive line, get more assets. But this team also has a ton of 3rd and 4th round picks, so you can get depth on the O-line and D-line, the two areas I think they really need to address. So, I don't know. Plenty of options moving forward for the Vikings, but I love the Tomlinson and Peterson signing, and I overall have liked this team's offseason. Again, not a team that had a whole lot of money, so when you put that in consideration, I feel pretty confident putting them in B tier as well. And now we're going to get to the one D tier that is going to be on the list, the Atlanta Falcons. Sorry, Falcons fans, that you guys haven't done anything. You bring in Eric Harris, maybe that works out. Cool. You make the trade for Lee Smith, back-to-back off seasons. You trade for a tight end. Yeah, I can't justify it being any higher than D. I get the cap is tough to navigate for that team, but it's not been a good offseason. On to the Carolina Panthers. They lose Curtis Samuel. His replacement will be David Moore. They get him at a good value. 2 years, $4.75 million. I think if you play him and Robbie Anderson on the outside, DJ Moore becomes that creative do-it-all option that Samuel was. He can play in the slot. You can get him the ball in open space. I really like that. And overall, Anderson and Moore, those are 2 wide receiver 1s in my eyes. And then David Moore is a good wide receiver 2. So you're keeping good weapons around Teddy Bridgewater or whoever else might end up being under center for Carolina. The signings of Cam Ervin and Pat Elflein, I'm iffy on. With Elflein, it's tough because if the Jets are moving on from you, looking to upgrade that position, that doesn't represent or look good on your behalf. And for Cam Irving, he didn't look great as a starter, but as a fill-in player last year, he didn't look too bad. So he's a wild card for sure. They do keep Taylor Moton, and that's a good use of the franchise tag. Keeping him around, that definitely goes a long way. But then I love these next 3 signings. Denzel Perriman, 2-year deal, super athletic. I like the potential. This team needed that inside linebacker to go with Shaq Thompson, and I think the upside's there for Perriman, and it's a pretty inexpensive contract, so I feel like it's good value. Speaking of inexpensive and good value, Hassan Reddick, 1 year, $6 million deal. Are you kidding me? That's an absolute steal. It makes me question what the Cardinals were thinking. It makes me question what all of us were thinking. I definitely thought he'd be making double digits when it comes to, $10+ million a year. Definitely thought that was on his horizon, but I guess the market settled and there wasn't enough interest. So Carolina gets a great player opposite of Brian Burns. That pass rush is going to be lethal. And also, I like the signing of Morgan Fox, 2 year, $8.1 million. Good value, good player. Fits what they want to have on that defensive line. So, all in all, I like the offseason for Carolina. I'm going to put them in A tier. I think they are also in a spot, just like I said with Denver, to now also move up in the draft or make a big move to get that franchise QB of the future. But they've also had an offseason where they addressed some needs and overall just got better while being conscious of their cap. A couple of those signings might make me change my mind, like those offensive linemen, but right now I feel good about them having an A-tier offseason. And I'll do another one of these videos before the draft and probably again after the draft because a lot can still change. On to the New Orleans Saints. Look, they had no cap room to do anything. Really, the big moves they made was franchise tagging Marcus Williams, and you keep Jameis Winston around on a great contract. 1 year, $5.5 million deal, and there's some incentives that could make it go all the way up to $12.5. But even then, if he's hitting those marks, $12.5 million, you'll pay the man. He's totally worth it. They bring in P.J. Williams, Ty Montgomery. Montgomery's whatever. P.J. Williams, I don't think they want to have starting. I think they might end up actually going cornerback in the first round just based off how this offseason has transpired. All things considered, though, with what the Saints could do in regards to cap room, I think they made the right moves. And I also want to apologize. Once we got an extra B tier team, the Falcons fell off the page. But, sorry, you don't get to see the D tier anymore. I got to figure out a better way to record this moving forward. But nonetheless, I'll put the Saints in B tier. Next up is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that's our third and final S tier team for this offseason video. Look, they won the Super Bowl and they're running it back. Give them a ton of credit. They're keeping the core together. Franchise tag Chris Godwin. The two sides hope to work out a long-term deal. They also re-signed Rob Gronkowski, 1 year, $10 million deal, but there's a void year with it, so it's not all on this year's cap hit. Then they also bring back Shaq Barrett, $18 million a year. That is an absolute steal for someone who easily could have been making 20 plus. I mean, easily with his production over the past couple of years, he could have been making big money, but he takes a small pay cut, stays in Tampa Bay. They also keep Levante David around 2 years, $25 million. Good value. Keep him and Devin White together. Love that for that defense. They also re-signed Kevin Minter. All in all, it was a fantastic offseason for Tampa Bay. Kept the core together, and they're going to be positioning themselves with how they ended last season, of course, ended up winning the Super Bowl. As long as they play good football, they avoid injuries, they're going to be one of the best teams in the NFC, maybe the front runner in that conference. The last division we'll talk about is the NFC West. We'll start with the Cardinals, and I'm actually going to put them in A tier. I like a lot of what the Cardinals have done so far this offseason. Bring back Kelvin Beachum. He's a good enough starter. You get him at a great value. 2 years, $4 million. They make the trade to get Rodney Hudson, give up a third rounder, but Rodney Hudson's among the best centers in football, and he has been for a long time, trying to keep Kyler Murray upright, trying to boost up that running game. Love the addition of Hudson. You bring back Marcus Golden, 2 years, $9 million deal. I wonder if they knew how much Hassan Reddick would end up signing for, and if that would make them change this decision to go get Reddick back instead of Golden. But nonetheless, Golden's an okay player. And of course, the big addition of J.J. Watt across that defensive line. That's a big-time add to that defense. They also bring in A.J. Green, 1 year, $6 million deal. I felt like this team needed a slot wide receiver, but they also use four wide receivers a lot. So maybe Green and Hopkins on the outside. Maybe it ends up becoming Christian Kirk on that as that guy on the inside. I don't know. I feel like he might have some success there, but nonetheless, this is a team that uses a lot of wide receivers, and they get a player who has had good years, and they get him at a good value, and maybe he can bounce back and bring back some, not all, but some of that production he used to put forward on the gridiron. They signed Robert Alford. That's okay. Basically, they have positioned themselves at pick 16, go out and get the best cornerback available in the draft. Maybe even sign Steven Nelson if the Steelers are forced to cut him. Maybe they can make the trade for him. I think the cap hit would be a little too big there, but if the Steelers cut him, maybe they can go sign Nelson and he can be a plug-and-play starter and address that core. All in all, love what the Cardinals have put together. Then we get to the LA Rams, and they are definitely hamstrung when it comes to their cap situation, but I'm going to put them in A tier. They were aggressive, and they made the moves necessary to be a legit Super Bowl caliber team. Look, they make the trade to go get Matt Stafford, giving up future ones, but they get a big upgrade at that position, the most important position on the field, and that'll open up that offense for Sean McVay. Now he has a guy who can make reads, has a big arm, super smart, very accurate. It's a slam dunk for that offense. Leonard Floyd might be a bit of an overpay. $16 million feels like a lot, but the Giants, I think, drove that offer up and forced the Rams to have to bump up the money. But nonetheless, the big year he had last year, 10.5 sacks, it came in that locker room with that organization, so why not keep him around? He's proven to be a good fit and a good player for that team. So I like that signing. The only two moves they made, but they have positioned themselves to be a Super Bowl contender. On to the San Francisco 49ers. This is another team that could be A tier, but I'm going to go ahead and put them in B. They keep Trent Williams around. That's a big part of that offense. They make him the highest paid offensive lineman, and he's 32 years old, so I'm glad he's back, but it felt like a ton of money. And I don't know if you can necessarily do better, though. So it's a tough line to walk. It's, which side of the coin do you want to be staring at? And then they bring back Kyle Juszczyk. Not a lot of teams use fullbacks, so paying Juszczyk more than $5 million a year, by definition, might have to be an overspend. Juszczyk does a lot for him, though, so I'm not knocking either of these signings. It's just like, it's unfortunate that they both had to be so expensive. They bring in Alex Mack. I think that's a good move. Weston Richburg going to be retiring. One year, $5.5 million deal on the Mack contract, so I think that's solid value. DJ Jones, Samson Ibukam, you get some depth on that defensive side. Ibukam can kind of do a lot of different things, 2-year contract for him. And then they bring back Emmanuel Mosley and Jason Verrett, smaller contracts, right around $5 million for Mosley, $5.5 million for Verrett. So 2 players that can be good. Verrett looked really solid last year. He finally stayed healthy. Mosley's still getting better. This team also doesn't look like they're going to be moving on from Jimmy G. So at pick 12, they can get in a legit shutdown corner. Then I look at this team as Super Bowl ready. Maybe they do decide to move on from Garoppolo. Maybe they're trying to get a QB in the draft. Maybe they're going after Watson. I don't know. There's still a lot to be seen. But as it's currently constructed with Jimmy G under center, they're a cornerback, a legit CB1 away from being an elite team back into the Super Bowl where they were a couple years ago. Next up, the Seattle Seahawks. I'll give them a B. They'll be the final team we'll talk about. I like them bringing back Chris Carson. There's a void year on that contract, so it's really just a 2-year, little over $14.6 million deal. He's been good for that team. There's not a whole lot of power backs in the NFL that can be explosive and plus starters in the NFL, but Carson has proven to be just that. Gerald Everett, good young athletic tight end, helps out that offense, gives another weapon for Russell Wilson. They bring in Gabe Jackson. They made the trade for him. They make the trade with the Raiders to get Gabe Jackson, trying to get that offensive line boosted up. Obviously, I like that. And they bring back Poona Ford on a very cheap deal, 2 years, $14 million deal for a very good nose tackle. So that's a solid signing. And this is a team that didn't have the cap room to go out and make a huge splash. Maybe they could have done a little bit more. Maybe they didn't need to pay Chris Carson that much. I don't know, a lot of different variables, but overall, I think they've had a solid offseason. But I hope you all have enjoyed the video, the tier ranking of each team's offseason so far in free agency. Still a lot to be played out. If you did enjoy, please hit that like button and comment down below your thoughts on who has had the best offseason. Which team did I get right? Which am I completely wrong on? I'd love to have your thoughts. And who's your favorite team, and what's a signing you're happy with, and what's a signing you're maybe not so thrilled with? I'd also love to hear your thoughts on that. If you're new to the channel, like football content, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And until next time, everybody, my name's Tej, and I'm signing off.
I'm part of the last generation that remembers time of God.